My name is David Lammy, and it's my pleasure to address probation staff and workers and Napo members as the Labour Shadow Justice Secretary. This has been an extraordinarily difficult and challenging year for so many of us. So many of us who've lost friends because of grief and because of this pandemic, or indeed other ailments that have got worse because of the problems that we now face in our National Health Service and across the NHS. But it's also been a challenging year for key workers particularly. A year in which we thank so much NHS workers and care staff particularly, but it's really important to remember the hidden heroes that are probation staff supporting very vulnerable people, trying to transcend their crimes and to live a life and make a contribution to our wider society. And probation staff have really struggled. They've struggled because they're working against a backdrop of austerity and very, very challenging public services that doesn't just affect them, it affects their clients. The housing crisis that we face across the country, the huge problems we've got with food scarcity and the need for food banks, massive unemployment, and I'm thinking of double the rate of unemployment, particularly here in London, of black communities relative to the rest of the population. All of that ends up in the in tray of our probation workers, often forgotten as those essential key workers, and then dealing on top of that with their own health and safety concerns on the front line, offering services to vulnerable people, but aware that they too are putting themselves at the mercy sometimes of the COVID-19 disease. And the government has not been there in the way that we would have hoped at the beginning of this crisis and at these key critical moments. The second thing that I think is important to recognise is this amount of change that's happening as we move from this botched privatisation that saw almost a collapse, frankly, of probation services across the country back to reunification and all the challenges that that places as we put probation back into public hands. You can expect me, as the leader on these issues of the official opposition, to be watching very, very carefully how this reunification is taking place and how it will affect your working lives over the course of the next few months and years. And then third, we've seen the Inspectorate's report raising real concerns about race. When I was doing my review a few years ago, it was still the case that people talked about the literacy on race that probation service had and a context in which black and minority ethnic workers could feel empowered and feel fulfilled. Something has happened over the last few years that has completely transformed that picture. And in this year particularly, as we think about whether Black Lives Matter, it is so important that we lift up the prospects and the hopes of Black, Asian and minority ethnic workers across the probation service. So those are the key things that I'm reflecting on at this time. I wish you the very, very best in this challenging moment, and we look forward to a better era for probation staff and Napo members over the years ahead. Thank you very much indeed.